Okay, so before we dive into the chess, I need to address this whole mangled up, duffed up head thing. I actually forgot about this, and then I put the camera on just now, saw my head, and then I thought, okay, I best address that one. So what happened? Well, I was playing chess yesterday over the board. Guy tries to take my queen illegally, so I give him the old, bam, man, 1-2. He comes back at me. Whole thing goes nuts. We're rolling around on the floor. The captains join in. The whole team match abandoned. No, none of this happened. No, I play rugby as well as chess, and I hack my way around at golf since COVID hit. So I'm kind of a jack of all trades, master of none right now. Anyway, that's what duffed up my head. Playing rugby yesterday, you do get knocked about, kind of like American football for all of you guys in the US. Pretty rough game, but yeah, it gets me out and about. Anyway, that duffed up my head, but I'm okay. It's all good. Back to the chess. So this game here, this is Magnus Carlsen playing against Vishy Anand. Now this is an absolute classic encounter from GRENKE Chess 2015, and the reason I dug it out is I was looking for these great Carlsen games of the past where he gives his queen at some point in the game, because everyone just loves these Magnus games right now, right? So I'm just bringing the people what they want. But if you want to see some other players in action, then do please let me know. The game suggestions are really helpful. I can keep bringing the videos out. But on to this one. So Vishy, he was playing white, and after pawn d4, Magnus plays the Dutch defense. Now this is a daring move at the elite level of chess. Excuse me. Because as we'll see in a moment, you create weaknesses that can be exploited long term. Now Vishy goes for this fianchetto way of playing, the classic way of playing. E6 from Carlsen, and after Vishy takes the centre, he goes c6. So he's going to set up the stone wall, it's called. Knight f3 and pawn d5. By the way, you can go knight h3. There are different kind of setups here for white, but this is the main line. Now we see castles, and bishop d6 covers this square. And this is a real key battleground, the e5 square in these lines. And this is why you often don't see black playing this at top level chess, because it leaves weaknesses that white can exploit down the line. Just turning the engine off here. So b3 from Vishy, classic idea. And we now see queen e7, which is directed against white playing an immediate bishop a3, because white wants to exchange these bishops and then get greater access to this square. And you sometimes now see bishop b2, it's the main move in fact, followed by queen c1, then preparing the exchange. But what we see here from Vishy is a different way of going, immediately putting the knight on e5. Now you might think you want to capture that one, force white to occupy that weak square with a pawn, but the problem here is you've just left your dark squares way too weak. I mean, look at that bishop already hitting the diagonal, and this is a lot better for white. You don't want to be doing that. So instead, castles was played by Magnus. Now this knight developed, and now here's a really interesting moment, because b6 is the main way to play for black. You prepare to take care of this bad bishop stuck on c8. But what Magnus does is pawn a5. But there's a lot of nice positional points to this too. You gain space, you start to activate the rook, and Vishy doesn't respond the best. Actually, the computer wants to bring this knight to f3 here, and then develop this bishop to f4 or g5. Not to this diagonal, but Vishy goes the way more human way to play, and after Magnus develops the knight, we see queen c2 developing, and the pawn carries on. And actually the top move here is to take on a4. That's how much the computer does not want this pawn to reach a3. But after this knight comes to f3, we see knight e4, pawn e3, and now Magnus gets this clamp on the queen side, which is a bit uncomfortable for white. So Vishy brings the bishop to c3. Now he doesn't mind if Magnus wants to capture, because that is a very strong knight on e4. So instead Magnus, he takes on e5. What's his idea? Well, now he's cleared the d7 square and he can develop this bishop. And he's got a long-term idea here of activating the bishop like this, trying to get it out of the pawn chain and make it less of a bad bishop. And now Vishy makes a very strange positional decision by taking on d7. Why would you give up such a strong knight for this bad bishop? Well, we'll see his idea in the game. But better here would have been something like pawn f3, immediately kicking that knight. Or bishop e1, then f3, preparing those standard plans. But after takes here, queen recaptures. Well, now Vishy goes c5. This was his idea. And after the bishop drops, he goes b4, heading for this queenside expansion. But Magnus actually takes the fight to Vishy on the king side and the centre much quicker here, and Vishy seems to have underestimated it. So pawn h5 now played, and it's a really nice idea of softening up this square. So if f3 immediately, for example, black can take, queen recaptures, and then pawn h4. And already there's two pieces converging here. If white takes, well, that's not a nice pawn structure, so black's getting play. But what we see in the game is bishop e1 from Vishy, preparing pawn to f3. But now Carlsen gets pawn e5 because the bishop left this diagonal. Vishy captures, the bishop takes back, hits this rook in the corner, and after rook d1, we now see the queen come to e6. There were problems here with the pin, tactics on this knight, so it comes away from that, and it starts to eye this pawn on a2, which is an interesting point. So f3 now from Vishy. He drives back this knight, and now bishop h3 pressures this pawn, g6 defends, and now e4 cranks open the board, getting those lines open for the bishops. And after captures, pawn recaptures, it looks like black is in big trouble, but there are resources. One is knight g4. The other is what Carlsen played, a very unusual idea, but a very strong one. Bishop to b2, so it cuts the communication of the queen with this pawn, and now the black queen is threatening to capture it. And what's so nice here is the timing of Carlsen's play, because after pawn takes on f5, he captures this pawn, and there's no time for white to take here, because now black has a tactic. Can you see it if you pause the video? So the way to play here is with bishop to d4 check. You pick up this queen on c2, which is undefended. This is the problem. So Vishy goes bishop f2 to cover that check, but now g5 keeps the lines closed, and it's advantage black because of this very dangerous a-pawn. So rook fe1 from Vishy. He wants to invade with counterplay. Magnus drops back with the queen. Very logical, looking to run this pawn at the right moment. This rook now invades, and now we see the knight move away, which is the best move because you want to retreat this bishop to then be able to run the a-pawn without having the queen take on b2. So knight g4, Vishy captures, the pawn takes back, and he checks the king. So it's double-edged the way black is playing. This is always the case in the Dutch. You're often opening your own king. But here after king h7, there isn't actually a killer blow, because although, for example, white can take this pawn, that's actually a bad move, because black now retreats the bishop with tempo against the rook, and after it captures a second pawn, which is the best move, well, the problem now is that this pawn is running through. Now, technically best is starting with rook f to d8 to distract this rook away from the d file and the support of this square where the bishop can block. Don't want to go down all the lines here, but this pawn is decisive in the position. So that's why Vishy, he didn't take on g5, allow bishop f6 with tempo. He now plays a move which invites on Magnus to give the queen. But just before I show that, the best way for him to play here was with rook e6, because you cut the communication of the queen and the game goes on. Black still has to show that they can retreat the bishop in the right way and then advance through the pawn. Won't go deeper from here. What did Vishy do in the game? He played rook to d7. So the queen is skewered to the king, forces the capture here, and then there's pawn to f6. Now this was Vishy's idea, that you open up this discovery of the queen, the check discovery, plus there's now a threat to check here and win the queen. It's a very dangerous attack, but he's overlooked resources in the position for Magnus, and Magnus now finds the best move. Can you guess what he played? The thumbnail maybe gives it away, plus the fact he gives his queen. So he goes queen d1 check, forcing Vishy to capture, but then he wins this rook here. So he's got two rooks for the queen, but why is this good for black? Well, it's all about this a-pawn running, plus after check, the king is getting safe. Now you can actually take this pawn, but instead Magnus, he tucks the king away. It is the best move, and after pawn h4 from Vishy, just desperate to rip open lines, en passant takes from Magnus. Here we actually see resignation because Anand is just lost. The a-pawn is deciding the game. The problem is he can't drum up play against the king. I mean, where do you actually go to drum play? If you come here, well, the rook simply captures. Where are the checks? Yes, you can come down here, but after side steps, there are no more checks. And once again, this pawn is running massive problem. So Anand loses this one to Carlsen in the Dutch defense. Incredible game. If you want to see another from Magnus Carlsen, then check out the video on screen. Thanks very much for watching and see you soon.